Just a quick note before we begin. This explainer is a summary of Dr. West's incredible lecture on pulmonary blood flow. You know, his textbook on respiratory physiology has been the foundation for literally generations of us in pulmonary and critical care. Dr. West also recorded a complete lecture series, and believe me, it is well worth watching. I've put the link in the description below for you. We also have summaries of his other lectures right here on this channel, so feel free to browse those as well.
All right, first things first, we have to get our heads around just how fundamentally different the pulmonary circulation is from the systemic circulation. You know, the one that supplies the rest of the body. They're two circuits running in series, sure, but their characteristics, they couldn't be more distinct.
And the differences are just stark when you look at the pressures. I mean, look at this. The mean pressure on the pulmonary artery is only about 15 millimeters of mercury. Compare that to the mean aortic pressure on the systemic side, which is hanging out around 100. That is a massive, massive difference, and it tells you everything about the different jobs these two circuits were built to do.
So here's the crucial point. How can the pressure be so much lower in the lungs? Well, think about it. Both circuits have to handle the exact same cardiac output, right? About 5 liters per minute. But since the pressure drop across the lungs is just a fraction, about a tenth, of the systemic side, it means the pulmonary vascular resistance has to be about 10 times lower. It's simple physics. And this low-pressure, low-resistance design is the key to pretty much everything that follows.
So this low-pressure setup has direct anatomical consequences. Let's dig into that and see how it builds our understanding of vascular resistance. And as you're about to see, in the lungs, resistance is far from a simple, fixed number.
Okay, before we even talk about resistance, we have to split the pulmonary vessels into two main types. First, you have the tiny alveolar vessels. These are basically the capillaries. They're draped over the alveoli, almost like a net, so they're directly exposed to alveolar pressure. Then you have the larger extraalveolar vessels. These are the bigger arteries and veins that are actually embedded in the lung tissue itself. As the lung inflates, the tension in the alveolar walls literally pulls these vessels open. We call that phenomenon radiotraction.
So how do we actually define vascular resistance? Well, it's pretty straightforward. It's just the pressure drop needed to drive a certain amount of flow. You calculate it as your input pressure minus your output pressure, all divided by the total blood flow. Simple enough.
But here is where the pulmonary circulation gets really, really interesting. It behaves completely differently from a simple electrical wire. You know, if you increase the voltage across an electrical resistor, its resistance stays exactly the same. That is not what happens in the lung. As you increase the pressure across the pulmonary circuit, say during exercise when cardiac output goes up, the resistance actually falls.
So why does that happen? Why does resistance fall when pressure rises? There are two beautiful mechanisms at play. First up is recruitment. As the pressure rises, it starts to pop open capillaries that were previously closed or just weren't getting any flow. It's like opening up new lanes on a highway. You get more parallel circuits, which brings the overall resistance way down. The second mechanism is distension. The capillaries that are already open are so incredibly thin-walled that they simply expand in diameter as pressure increases, which of course further reduces their individual resistance.
Now, it's not just blood pressure that messes with resistance. Lung volume has a really profound and kind of counterintuitive effect. Look at this graph. Pulmonary vascular resistance is actually at its absolute lowest at our normal resting lung volume, what we call functional residual capacity, or FRC. If you go to very low lung volumes, those extraalveolar vessels lose their radial traction and they get squashed, which increases resistance. But if you go to very high lung volumes, the alveolar walls get stretched so taut that they thin out and compress the capillaries running through them, which also increases resistance. It's a real Goldilocks situation.
Okay, now that we've covered the physics of resistance, let's see how a force as simple as gravity creates this incredibly complex and dynamic system inside the lung. It leads to a very, very uneven distribution of blood flow.
So if you're standing upright, blood flow in your lungs is not uniform at all, not even close. Gravity creates a hydrostatic pressure gradient, just like in any column of water. And what that means is that the pressure, and therefore the flow, is way higher at the bottom or the base of the lung, and it can be shockingly low, almost zero, at the top, the apex.
We can explain this really unequal distribution with a brilliant physiological model. It's all based on the interplay of three key pressures: the arterial pressure, PA, the venous pressure, PV, and crucially, the alveolar pressure, big P, big A. The relationship between these three pressures defines three totally distinct zones of the lung.
So, what's the clinical takeaway from these zones? Well, Zone 1 is essentially wasted ventilation. We call it alveolar dead space. This is a part of the lung where the alveolar pressure is so high that it's actually higher than the arterial pressure, and it just squashes the capillaries flat. So you get air in, but there's no blood to pick up the oxygen. Now, normally, we don't really have a zone 1. But we can create one, say with high positive pressure ventilation, or it can happen in pathologic states, like severe hypotension from a hemorrhage.
Now, Zone 2 is where things get really cool. It operates on a principle known as the Starling resistor, or my favorite, the waterfall effect. Here, your arterial pressure is high enough to push blood in, but the alveolar pressure is still higher than the venous pressure on the other side. This creates a kind of dam, and because of that, the flow is determined only by the difference between the arterial and alveolar pressure. It doesn't matter what the downstream venous pressure is doing. Just like a waterfall, the flow is set by the height of the fall, not by how deep the river is at the bottom.
And finally, we get down to Zone 3, at the basis of the lungs. Here, the system behaves much more conventionally. The hydrostatic forces have raised both the arterial and the venous pressures so that they're both greater than the alveolar pressure. The capillaries are held wide open, and blood flow is determined by that classic arterial to venous pressure difference. And flow just keeps increasing as you go further down this zone because of that ongoing recruitment and distension we talked about.
So far, pretty much everything we've talked about has been passive, physical forces. But the lung is much smarter than that. It has a powerful active control mechanism that completely flips the typical systemic vascular response on its head.
And that response is called hypoxic pulmonary vasoconstriction. It's amazing. If you have an animal breathe a low oxygen mixture, its pulmonary artery pressure rapidly and markedly increases. And this is all caused by the constriction of the small pulmonary arteries. Think about that for a second. The systemic circulation does the exact opposite. It dilates to try and get more oxygen to hypoxic tissues. But the lungs, they constrict.
This response is triggered directly by low oxygen levels right there in the alveoli. And, it's a useful mechanism. It helps divert blood away from poorly ventilated parts of the lung to the better ventilated parts, which improves your V/Q matching. But what is its primary evolutionary purpose? Why would the lung develop a reflex that seems so, backward?
And the answer is one of the most incredible, most dramatic events in all of physiology: the transition from fetal life to newborn life. You see, in the fetus, the lungs are filled with fluid, and they are naturally hypoxic. So this massive hypoxic vasoconstriction keeps the pulmonary vascular resistance incredibly high, and that shunts blood away from the lungs, which aren't doing anything yet. But at the moment of birth, the baby takes its first breath, filling the alveoli with oxygen for the very first time. And in an instant, that hypoxic vasoconstriction is released, PVR plummets, and pulmonary blood flow surges, establishing the adult circulation. It's just beautiful.
Okay, let's take a moment to pause here. Hypoxemic pulmonary vasoconstriction is a very important phenomenon of a lot of clinical significance in ICUs. I have a separate video dedicated to this topic. The links are in the description below. So let's continue.
Okay, so beyond its absolutely critical role in gas exchange, the lung also has a whole other job. It acts as a really sophisticated metabolic organ, and it's uniquely positioned to process all sorts of substances in the blood.
And the range of what it does is remarkable. The lung endothelium is loaded with angiotensin-converting enzyme, which, as we all know, activates angiotensin 1 to the very powerful vasoconstrictor angiotensin 2. But at the same time, it inactivates other substances like bradykinin and serotonin, pulling them out of circulation. It can even secrete defensive molecules like IgA. And it's also incredibly selective. It lets key hormones like epinephrine and vasopressin pass right on through, completely unchanged.
Thank you for your time today. I really hope you found this useful. Medicine is just filled with these long-standing assumptions, and real progress only begins when we start to question them. So treat all sources with a healthy skepticism, and really do yourself a favor and take the time to review Dr. West's book on respiratory physiology.